Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and today we're doing another sort of what I'm going to call a prelude to the Tomed incident. This one is now more focused on the Federation. This is kind of a, how should we describe it? Star Trek 6, where are they now? You know, that's basically what this is what does the Federation, what does the galaxy at large look like after Star Trek 6, after Kithomer? In the early 24th century, what does it look like? What's changed? What stayed the same? What's the kind of position between the Federation and the Romulans that leads to the Tomed incident? So, I'll try to get into it. The reason I'm doing this here and not in the Tomed incident is just so that everything's laid out. You know where everyone is. You know what's going on. Kind of, you have a rough idea of the situation. I don't have to explain everything to you in that episode. And that will allow us to focus on the events. And particularly in this little video, we're going to be focusing on that Federation perspective and, you know, what has or hasn't changed there, because that's quite important. We've covered the Romulans a lot, and we have a reasonable idea of their perspective, but we haven't so much looked at the Federation. So that's what we're going to do here. Right, so let's get into it. So, Kithomer was important. Kithomer changed a lot. But it did not change everything. The peace treaty is still uneasy. In a lot of beta canon novels, there's frequent flashpoints which, you know, threaten to break the peace. This is not, you know, the Federation and Klingons become allies all of a sudden. That's not how that worked. The Federation and Klingons becoming allies is way, way, way off. They're at peace, and it's an uneasy peace, for pretty obvious reasons. They don't trust each other, and why should they? And a lot of the same people are still serving in both fleets, and they hold a certain level of prejudice against the enemy. That's, you know, it's hard for them to adapt to the fight, to the fact that they're no longer in this Cold War anymore. And essentially what happens of this, so on one level, you still have some tension to some distrust. It's not a Cold War, because certain steps have been taken to de-escalate, and we'll get on to that. So, but there's still a distrust, and, you know, no one's really sure of, you know, who the Klingons are closer to at this point. But essentially, where one Cold War ends, another begins. And really, the Federation's focus, their point of fear, the outside external threat to them, now appears to be the Romulans, and there's a lot of uncertainty and fear around them. Add to that the fact that they inherited, I mean, you know, this is literally only a year or so after, a few years after Star Trek 6, where we had a very militarized starfleet. That's still there. All those people, most of those people, you know, apart from the people who actually participated in the conspiracy to start the war, but, you know, those are a real minority. Everyone else is still there. And in fact, you know, if you look at Captain Kirk as a pretty standard model Starfleet officer, it's like he couldn't shake his prejudice. He was still very much kind of in that military mindset, and, you know, it was going to take a generation or two to move on, and that hasn't happened yet. That's still working through the system. So the result is that kind of inevitably a new Cold War takes place. The Romulans no longer have the Klingons to kind of distract the Federation. They are now at the center of the Federation's focus, so they feel acutely vulnerable. They're equally not sure if they can trust the Klingons. The Klingons, okay, they're starting to demilitarize, but the Klingons could still threaten them a lot, and they just don't know now. It's all a bit chaotic in the Klingon Empire, and who knows what's going to happen with that. It's a very unstable situation. And, you know, they both the Romulans and the Federation do hold grudges and are aware of the threat that they each pose to one another. So that's the kind of the general situation. That's kind of what happens after Kithomer. There are specific events that I will detail in the Tomed incident that kind of help build that up, but suffice it to say that that's the general vibe. So now I'm just going to take a look at Star Trek, you know, the cast of Star Trek 6. Where are they now? Kirk is, of course, MIA as of the launch of the Enterprise B. Scotty is retired, and I'm not sure if he's locked in a transporter buffer yet, but, you know, he's out the picture. Now we get to the people who are actually still around. Sulu. So Sulu is said to have commanded the Excelsior up until after the Tomed incident. He then, soon after, runs for president. Now, I can't imagine that Sulu would stay as captain for over 20 years. I would imagine that the Tomed incident, for context, is 2311, and Kithomer is 2293, so it's nearly 20 years. Um, but I can't imagine he'd stay a captain. I would imagine that by the end he was a commodore or admiral who kept his flag aboard the Excelsior. That's my interpretation. But that's essentially Sulu. He will rise to one of the highest positions, and he will be a significant figure. Spock commands the USS Intrepid, does a stint in science as, a science ship or whatever, commanding that. Then in 2300, he becomes Ambassador Spock. Now, I'm not 100% sure if I would have him become, if I'm going to stick to that particular date. This is beta canon. It's malleable, it's flexible. Trust me, I'm not sticking to the beta canon on what happens at Tomed. And it's going to be very, very different. It may well be that he is, at the time of the Tomed incident, he is actually still in command of USS Intrepid, and then will become an ambassador afterwards. Chekhov, as of 2295, was first officer of the USS Excelsior. Chekhov had a really rough few years, if you read the beta canon on him. Like, he really was distraught at the death of Kirk, and then later on, in some beta canon timelines, Demura Sulu, Sulu's daughter, who was helmsman on the Enterprise B, she's killed during a mission. Chekhov is really quite upset with Captain Harriman about that and punches him at the funeral. Nearly gets court-martialed, but basically Sulu's like, no, come on, Chekhov, come with me. Be my first officer. I'll look after you. And then eventually he commands the USS Potemkin, which I believe is in fact an Excelsior class itself. Uhura. Now, in original beta canon, she was commanding the USS Hermes, communications ship of some description. Now, that's kind of been changed a little bit, because now she's commanding a ship called the USS Leograndance. Leograndance? Something like that. Something French. French Knight. Because it's a Lancelot class ship. Now, if you look at what we see in Picard, that's clearly just a Walker class ship with slight modifications. So maybe it is just an updated Walker class, and used as a communications ship. That would make perfect sense, especially in the 23rd century. Not my personal choice, but would fit. I'd probably have her on a Soyuz class. Finally, John Harriman, still commanding the Enterprise B. We can assume he kind of grows into it, and he is not quite as inept and lacking confidence as he was when we saw him in Generations. Generations, man. So that's the characters, but of course, what you're all here for is you want to hear about the ships. What's happened on the starship front. So, firstly, there's no one's really covered what kind of naval limitation treaties or disarmament treaties happened at Kithomer, but I would assume some, but they were probably quite limited. So I think the naval limitation/disarmament treaties have a couple stipulations. So for the Federation, the stipulations are they cannot build any new battle cruisers. Now, you've got to be very stringent on what a battle cruiser is. Essentially, as far as the Klingons are concerned, because they're the main signatories to the Kithomer Accords, a battle cruiser is something that has, capital ship, heavy cruiser level firepower, if not more, but is fast and maneuverable. This is to prevent them, basically, the Klingons feel like they're being directly countered. In the 90s, as well as the Excelsior coming out, you also had the Giorgio class coming out, which looks a lot like Excelsior, but kind of is a different evolutionary offshoot. But it's a battle cruiser. It's a very heavily armed battle cruiser. And the Klingons really don't like that, so no more of those. You can keep the ones that you've built, but no more of that. Also, again, no more ships with megaphasers. There may, in fact, also just be a general limitation on the number of megaphasers that can be in service at any point, because, as of Next Generation, we'll see a lot of Miranda variants that have anything but megaphasers, apart from the Antares, but that's a Dominion War variant technically. But the point being, because those are a direct counter to the Klingon disruptors, and they don't really like that. So that's what the Federation is expected to do, and the Klingons, on their part, have to hold off on any battlecruiser development, hold off on any torpedo development as well, developing photon torpedo technology, which they had the advantage in, instead, so they can focus on, all the internal spending that they need to do to, clean up Kronos, protect Kronos, save it from its ecological disaster, so on and so forth. The naval treaty is less... It's less about actual limitations of naval power. There's no cap on numbers or anything like that. It's more to show... it's more to kind of cement everyone is kind of acting in good faith. Everyone's acting in good faith. The Klingons aren't developing new battlecruisers. The Federation aren't developing things to counter Klingon battlecruisers. So that there's this kind of, understanding that we're not doing this head-to-head thing anymore. That's kind of the idea, is to prevent that direct competition. And just kind of, draw a line and prevent that competition. So that's the naval limitations treaties. Now, that doesn't touch Federation heavy cruisers, because the Klingons say, yeah, look, heavy cruisers are your thing. You can have them. They don't concern us that much. So, as a result, by 2311, by the Tomed incident, you would have at least 23 Excelsiors. That's just normal Excelsiors. 23 Excelsiors, which I believe is probably in excess of what was built of the original run of Constitutions. You would also have up to 8 Excelsior 2s, i.e. the Excelsior with the Enterprise B style. These are, as I have said before, they are cloaked Excelsiors. Now, I will go into why these cloaked ships exist. So Excelsior is in development in the 80s. Now, eventually they realised that it was designed to counter the Klingons. Originally the B-10, but that didn't pan out. But the transwarp drive was still going to be very useful in intercepting and catching Klingon ships. But obviously transwarp didn't pan out, and they kind of put the Excelsior into service as a regular heavy cruiser. But they still, it's still a very powerful ship, and it's got excellent performance qualities. And basically Starfleet Command look at this, and they've created their own cloaking device at this point. Like, I've said this before, but they captured a cloaking device as of the Enterprise incident back in the 60s. They also got another one from when Kirk brought back the Bird of Prey, and that was in the 80s. So they've had more than enough time to reverse engineer their own cloaking devices. What they may not have is ships that are purpose-built to carry them. As we get into the late 80s, in the early 90s, as these Excelsiors as the regular Excelsiors are entering service, and they're thinking, oh, you know what, and the Cold War with the Klingons is still going on, and Starfleet's already thinking, oh, if we modify some Excelsiors to carry cloaking devices, then in the event of a Klingon attack, we can have a squadron of these go behind enemy lines and just demolish the Klingon military infrastructure, just yank the rug out from underneath them, and basically stall their entire offensive. That was the plan for those cloaked Excelsiors. Now, obviously, with the Romulans, they take on a different quality. Basically, they're just mirroring exactly what the Romulans are doing with their cloaked ships. Their own version, albeit more limited, there's only 8 of them, of strategic strike. So, other kind of Excelsior derivatives, I mentioned the Giorgio. There may have been a couple constructed, but no more of those. Centaur, that can also be considered a battle cruiser. No more of that. Andor 2s, a bit expensive, limited run. Very limited derivatives. The only one that really kind of is built in numbers because it's simple is the Clemson, which is basically an Excelsior saucer and a nacelle. And that's good enough. Because of the naval limitation treaties, which are preventing these sort of intermediate battle cruisers being developed. And also because, Starfleet kind of is feeling like it can take its foot off the gas to an extent. Mirandas and Connies still in service, again with modifications to kind of keep them updated. But yeah, there's still plenty of Constitution class and Mirandas in service. Constitution is on its way out, but it's still a pretty decent frigate for the time. Now, there are also other cloak-equipped ships. They are much more defensive. They are designed to, again, play the part of essentially Starfleet's hunter-killers against the Romulans. That includes the Remora, which is an older ship, and the Columbia. These are old ships, but the Remora has got some additional space to incorporate the cloaking device, and the Columbia is a science ship. It has very good sensors, so that's why they're both good as defensive cloak ships designed to sniff out potential infiltrators. And obviously they'll work in tandem with other uncloaked ships, like the Soyuz and the Antares, so on and so forth. The original plan with these cloaked ships was to be used against the Klingons. It would give them a bit of an edge, hopefully take the momentum take the wind out of the Klingon sails before they got too far. But obviously, after Kithomer, that changes, and now they're focused on the Romulans, and they have their own application there, which I think you can understand what it would be. It's a kind of a standoff. It's a kind of mutually assured destruction or deterrence. Both sides are scared of one another. So, really, that's all I have to say about kind of setting the scene. That's just a bit of context, bit of world building, so that you understand the world of the early 24th century, of the Termed incident, the post-TMP era, the Excelsior era. This is, that's the best way to describe it, is this is the Excelsior era. This is the era where that ship is number one, and it's about Captain Sulu and the adventures, and man, I wish we got that show, but whatever. We've got this, and this will be something. Anyway, so, yeah, that's basically my summary of the astro-political situation, and also the kind of the general personal and situation of the world of Star Trek at this time. And that sets the stage of the Termed incident. So now the stage is set. The pieces arrayed. Now let us watch as this calamity unfolds. And let's see if you guys can guess what's going to happen. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all next time. Thank you to my members. My Navarks, David Reeves, Jeffrey Ballard, and Tully DT. My commanders, Chase Rector, PQSK, Philip Tye, Captain's Quarters, Jeff Hallam, Bird Monster, Captain Stryker, Mark Philippe, Miami Jules, Robert Sampson, and Sean Farrell. And my loyal Centurions, Nathaniel Mead, Pendlebury, BOS Domestic Disputes, Marcus Hall, Adam Bowman, Paul Lash, and Julian Arnott. Thank you guys for supporting the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.